Okay, we'll make a start. So, prynhawn da pawb. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jessa Scott. I'm Strategic Director at Estyn, and a warm welcome to you all to this Estyn Live session this afternoon. Let's start with a little bit of housekeeping. We had really hoped to be able to deliver a simultaneous translation for this event. Unfortunately, the translation has fallen through just before we started. So unfortunately, that's not an option. So ymddiheuriadau am hynny. A Welsh version of the webinar will be available when we publish it. So apologies to those of you who were hoping to be able to listen through the medium of Welsh. Thank you all for joining us today. In this session, we're going to hear from Lyn West, one of our inspectors and author of our recent thematic report on the additional learning needs system. The report looked at the progress of schools, settings and local authorities in supporting pupils with additional learning needs, and you'll hear a short summary from Lyn today. There's also a link. There will be a link in the Q&A section. If you look across the top of your screen, you should be able to see Q&A. We'll be popping a link in there to the web page where you can find the full thematic report and also some really lovely video clips from the providers who've joined us kindly today for this webinar. So we're thrilled to also welcome Maria Prosser and Maria Palmizzi from Whitmore High School, who've joined us, and Rachel Lloyd from Homestead Nursery. Thank you so much, all of you, for being willing to take part, and we can't wait to hear more about your experiences. Our thematic report includes fascinating video case studies from both Whitmore High and Homestead Nursery. And if you haven't had a chance to watch them yet, as I said, the links will be in the chat and they really are worth a watch. If you have any questions during today, we'd encourage you to use the Q&A button at the top of the screen also to submit questions, and you can do that in Welsh or English. We've got some people on hand who could translate that. So please do, and we'll try and deal with as many of those as possible during the session today. If we don't manage to get to them, then we will make sure we answer them afterwards. If you click on Q&A, there's an option to also submit a question anonymously should you want to do that. Okay, well, over to the people who really matter, and I'm going to hand over to Lyn West first of all, who's going to share a summary of the main messages from the report. So over to you, Lyn.
Diolch yn fawr iawn I ti, Jessa. Prynhawn da iawn I chi gyd. A very good afternoon to you all, and thank you all for joining us today. So today, as Jess has already alluded to, we'll be focusing on the main findings of our most recent ALN reform thematic review. And specifically, we'll focus on how non-maintained settings, primary, secondary and all-age schools are addressing ALN reform and the support provided by local authorities. So the thematic review highlights effective practices in inclusive education, and I'll walk you through the key findings and some of our recommendations. So let's begin then with the overall findings. Our review indicates that ALN reform is starting to improve the provision for pupils with ALN in settings where reform has been successfully implemented. Many pupils are making progress. However, it's important to note that this progress isn't consistent across the board. The implementation of these reforms is uneven, which means that some pupils' needs aren't always adequately supported. One of the main expectations of ALN reform is that all teaching and learning experiences, including the curriculum, should support the progress of every pupil, including those with ALN. In our review, we found that many schools and settings had developed an inclusive culture that focused on the learning and the well-being of all pupils. And our report exemplifies a range of effective practice. And as Jessa mentioned, we're very fortunate today to have leaders from 2 such settings with us who'll share their practice. However, in a minority of cases, the teaching and support provided weren't sufficient, and this lack of consistency has led to two of our key recommendations. Overall, the schools and settings that we visited had a secure understanding of the provision that they make for pupils with ALN. But it remains the case that the extent to which the provision is classed as ALP was unclear. Most schools and local authorities agreed that it would be beneficial for ALP to be clarified at a national level. For the first time, our review also examined early years settings and the role of the early years ALN lead officer. And the findings here were particularly positive. Early years settings were found to provide tailored and personalised learning experiences for children with ALN. And they are also well supported by the early years ALN lead officer, which has contributed to the overall success in these settings. We also focused on the important role of the Elenco. And since our last thematic report over the past year, the role has evolved significantly. Many schools have recognised the strategic importance of Elencos, especially under the new reform. We found that when Elencos are integrated into the senior leadership team, they play a crucial role in schools' quality assurance and improvement processes in enhancing the quality of ALN provision. However, not all schools have fully integrated Elencos into their decision-making processes, and in these schools, the impact of the Elenco role is limited. And this gap highlights another possible area for improvement. Another key area we examined in the provision for Welsh medium ALN provision. But unfortunately, this area remains underdeveloped. There are significant challenges related to recruitment, as well as the availability of Welsh medium specialist staff and standardised assessments and resources. This needs attention to ensure that pupils who require Welsh medium support are adequately catered for. So our recommendations focus on 4 key themes. The first is high quality teaching and learning. Secondly, developing the strategic role of the Elenco. Thirdly, equitable Welsh medium ALN provision. And then fourthly, consistent additional learning provision. Welsh Government has accepted the recommendations and actions are underway to address these areas. So in conclusion, while ALN reform has started to have a positive impact, there's still much work to be done to ensure that all pupils with ALN receive the support that they deserve by improving teaching practices, integrating Elencos more effectively, addressing the gaps in Welsh medium provision and ensuring consistency across settings, we can create a more inclusive and equitable educational system for all. Diolch bawb.
Diolch, Lyn. Diolch yn fawr am y crynodeb hynny. Thanks so much, Lyn, for that summary. And thank you again to everyone who's joined us this afternoon. And I can see people have been steadily coming in while Lyn was speaking there. So thank you for taking the time to join this Estyn Live webinar. Just a reminder that you can submit any questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the top of your screen, and we'll be making some time for those towards the end of the session. But now I'd like to turn to Maria from Whitmore High School to tell us a little bit about the practice there. So thanks both.
Hello, my name's Maria Prosser. I'm head of school here at Whitmore High School. We were part of the thematic review, and it was a complete privilege to be involved with that. What we wanted to do this afternoon was we wanted to share our vision for ensuring that our ALN pupils have the very best outcomes that they possibly can and the very best provision while they're in our high school. Whitmore High School is in the heart of Barry. It's got over 1,000 pupils in it, and it's got 14.6% of free school meals. some of our pupils come from some of the poorest areas of Wales.
My name is Maria Palmitzi, and I'm the assistant head teacher in charge of teaching and learning, and I also lead on the quality assurance practices as well. Do you want me to start talking? Can we have the next slide, please? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how teaching and learning looks at Whitmore High School. So one of the main things at our school is that we are a mixed ability school. So all our subjects teach in mixed ability classes. Maths is slightly different, but other than that, we teach in mixed ability. And the purpose of that for our ALN pupils is that they are supported. We teach to the top and we support and scaffold all our other learners within our classroom. And this is also shown through our teaching learning model. We have a very specific direct teaching model at our school that all teachers have been trained on, even new staff when they come in, it's part of our induction process. And that gives a consistency for our pupils. So those who are very anxious to go into the classroom about what to expect, it's a very similar experience where they go with the teachers that they have. So it alleviates that anxiety. But probably what we pride ourselves most on within our teaching and learning is our class rationales. At the forefront of our vision for teaching and learning is that we know our learners and that we know our learners really well. So at the beginning of every academic year, all teachers for every class that they teach creates a class rationale, and within that there are sections on EAL learners, MAP pupils, FSM learners, but we have a section on our ALN learners and any pupils that need additional support for their well-being. And on that, it allows our staff to specialise what the support that they will have for their specific subject. But it also means that we ensure that our staff read IDPs or pupil passports or any other documentation that we've been provided by the pastoral team or the ALN team. And this is really important. Now, we then quality assure those, myself and Maria quality assure those, and we use those when we do learning walks and drop-ins so that we can check that the provision that is being provided by our staff is actually going ahead in the classroom.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about culture and ethos. So culture, ethos and values is at the heart of everything that we do at Whitmore, and we live and breathe it. And it is very much based around the whole school approach to mental health and well-being. We pride ourselves on our relationships with our young people and really try to form strong relationships and a sense of belonging for those pupils, making sure they feel represented within the curriculum, but ensuring that we are always thinking about all the groups of learners in our school. What's very important is that is not just about our relationships with our pupils. It cascades from SLT so that everybody within the school feels that sense of belonging. That's really important. ALM pupils are considered at a strategic level. That's crucially important. The elenco is on the SLT, and no decisions are made in the school without considering the needs of our ALN learners. And that is a really important part of what we do. Okay.
Next slide, please. So I also lead partly on professional learning as well. So it's really important that I work alongside Maria and Matt Davis, our elenco, to ensure that any training professional learning that we provide within Whitmore supports all our learners and supports all our staff as well. So we really want to ensure that all our staff, including our support staff, are upskilled in current strategies and research for our ALN learners. One of the things that I look at in particular is what our school needs at specific times. And this means that when I do take part in any quality assurance practices, at least once or twice a year, the elenco takes part in that with me. So that if there is anything, if we're looking specifically at mixed ability teaching or any sort of literacy support strategies, and that's part of the quality assurance that we're looking at, that the elenco has a voice and has a part in that so that we can then develop that into our professional learning and training. So that everything that we do, our elenco is able to help us with our upskilling of our staff.
Okay, so we'll come to provisions now. So within our school, there is a a vast range of need. We have a very large autism base that is funded by the local authority, but alongside that, we run our own provisions. So you'll have seen in the thematic review, we focused on a provision for our EBSA learners. And so we have one of those at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. The idea of which is to obviously get those learners back into school, but a provision which is outside of the school building. We have many other provisions within the school to meet a range of needs. We understand that for most of our children, the universal provision will meet their needs, but outside of that, there is a small population of children who do need something above and beyond that, and that's what we creatively try to develop within our school, and we are really passionate about. So part of what we do is we've got a class specifically for cognition and learning to try and get those children up with their peers, and then we can pop them, they'd be able to go back into mainstream at some point in their school life. So part of that process obviously is identifying those learners very early on, making sure they've had that provision, and then making sure we've reviewed that they're making progress and that there is a value in that provision. And I think that's very, obviously very important to make sure that you're making the most of your funding towards that. But I think in a high school level, it is really important to say that we at Whitmore do try and be very creative with that. We make sure that we are leaving no stone unturned and making sure that we're meeting absolutely everybody's needs.
That's great. Thank you, Maria and Maria. Lots of really interesting things there about how it's all fitting together in Whitmore and that emphasis on working across between the AL and Co with other key members of staff, for example. So remember, if you've got questions for any of our guests or for us, please use the Q&A button at the top of your screen to pop those in and we'll come to those in a minute. But for now, we're going to move on to Rachel Lloyd from Homestead Nursery. So over to you, Rachel, and thank you.
Hi, it's nice to meet everybody. My name's Rachel Lloyd and I'm from Homestead Nursery in Gresford, Wrexham, North Wales. Our nursery is a 146 place nursery. We've got about 60 staff currently and about 250 families. My background is I used to be an early years teacher, and about 7 years ago I decided to take the plunge and put what I believed into practice by buying a nursery with my friend who is actually a midwife and health visitor. So got lots of different skills and experience to put into practice between us. I've got to say that it's been a privilege to be part of the thematic review and to be part of a case study. But it was actually quite a big surprise when we were first approached by Estyn after our inspection to ask if we would be able to give a bit of insight into our provision and what we actually do for children with additional learning needs. I actually said to the inspector that I didn't think it would be super useful for them to come and visit us because we don't make any specific provision. After the visit, I think a lesson that we've learned from that is that you don't always see what you do because you're doing it every day, and maybe that's a lesson that other people can take from this as well. So we don't actually put anything specific into practice. We do actually have about 3 children with additional learning needs with us currently, and obviously we have specific paperwork that we complete for them. But other than that, I think that is our approach is that every child is unique, and so we meet all children's needs. We don't make any differentiation for children with additional learning needs, as we're always trying to support all of our children. And the biggest way that we do this really at our nursery is through our environment. And our environment includes indoors and outdoors. It's our whole space. And that's super important to us. We are super lucky that we have lots and lots of outdoor space. We have a forest school on site, and our children choose between their indoor and outdoor provision daily. It's super important that they have choice. But I think with outdoors for all children, I think that they have, because they're not contained within 4 walls, they have time to explore environments at their own pace, and that's super important for all children, but particularly children with additional learning needs. Our indoor spaces, we do believe that there's no space too beautiful, so we always try and set our environment and our spaces to reflect this, that it doesn't have to be limited just because we have young children in our spaces. They are super capable and they are super confident, and the messages that you send by offering them genuine resources to explore every day really does reinforce that message that they are super capable and they are super confident. So they're sort of subliminal messages, but our environment is intentional. I think that's super important. Our resources, we set up lots and lots of invitations to play within our environment, within our spaces, and these are always open-ended. So we use lots of everyday objects, lots of natural materials to invite children to explore at their own pace. And again, this includes all children because the differentiation is by outcome. And we do see amazing progress for all children because we use so many open-ended resources. We say that we are Reggio inspired, we're a Reggio inspired nursery, and the biggest inspiration that we take from Reggio Emilia schools is that the environment is the third teacher. It is super important, as I spoke about before, that the messages you send with your spaces and with the materials that you offer send messages to children which then can reinforce and support their well-being. Also, that could have a negative impact if it, if you weren't intentional with your resources. We use lots and lots of loose parts. Again, when we show parents around nursery when they first come to choose a nursery for the children, I think these things are quite a big surprise to lots of parents, that children can actually learn and develop skills by playing with buttons, curtain rings, bottle tops, jam jar lids, pasta. And it is a bit of a surprise and a bit of change in mindset and a change of thinking for some parents, also for some of the staff that we inherited when we first took over nursery as well. So professional learning, staff training has been a big part of that, to show them the value of playing with loose parts. We also believe, as part of our Reggio inspiration, that children do have 100 languages. They express themselves in so many ways, so many different ways. And because most of our children, because we are preschool, most of them are developing expressive language, and probably 50% of them don't actually have expressive language when they're working with us. So the way that children explore materials and resources when they don't actually have speech, when that's developing, is very different to children who actually have speech. We've seen such a difference. That's an example of the photograph there. How children explore paint. Children who don't actually have speech are much more focused and spend much more time exploring the material than children who have speech. It is really interesting to watch. We also think really carefully about the materials that we offer to our children, so including the loose parts, but we always choose things for their sensory properties. We're trying to stimulate lots of brain connections by having different resources such as spices. We choose different materials for their textures. So we're stimulating all of the senses all of the time to develop brain connections, which obviously supports all children's development, as well as children with additional learning needs. Light is a big part of our Reggio inspiration, is a big part of our environment too. We have light tables. We use lots of different, that's the photograph that you can see is UV paint, and just giving children a different perspective by the materials that you offer. It's super interesting to see how they explore. There's an example on that photograph again of a light box and a little one exploring flour and the light and the powder paint that's mixed with it. And again, it's been sort of a bit of a journey for us to support staff to see the benefit of all of these things that I've spoken about. But I think that staff have really seen, as I said about parents, that children really do make progress and really do develop their skills by offering these different materials and resources. The little one that's on the cover of the thematic review, I actually saw her mum and her in the car park yesterday in nursery, and she's made such huge progress from spending time with us as a baby. With all of these resources, she's now walking confidently and starting to communicate. She uses Makaton daily, but all our staff are Makaton trained, and we find that all children, regardless of their additional learning needs, really do benefit from having Makaton. It's a different form of communication that they find super easy, and we really have seen that we have, I'm not saying we don't have any behaviours, but we have much less behaviours because children have lots of different avenues to communicate. Makaton is one of those. Speaking about professional development, we train our staff in the Solihull approach, and that is to ask 3 key questions. If we have any behaviours, we really try to put ourselves in children's shoes. And the 3 key questions are: what is their age and stage? Have there been any changes within their environment, whether that's the nursery environment or their home environment? And how well are they able to communicate those needs? And I think having that mindset and putting yourself in children's shoes really does make a difference with our environment as well. And just to finish on that, really, the way that I make sure that obviously this is being put into practice and that our environment is always supporting children's development and their skills. We do something called lines of inquiry, which is our planning process. So I meet fortnightly with all room managers to review their environment, and the biggest time that we spend is auditing our spaces. So we review our environment, we have a really detailed conversation about the room space, about our provision, about our resources, what's working, what's not, if there are any behaviours, challenges, issues, and that's how any needs are identified and that we do something about that. And we found that to be super successful, that we put all of our time into our environment and reviewing that, and that's really supported children's progress at our nursery.
That's great. Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you for the lovely images there that really brought to life what you were saying as well, in terms of some of the approaches at Homestead. Thank you ever so much, all of you. We've had one question in so far. Reminder to other people, we've got a few minutes for questions. If you do want to ask a question, if you use a Q&A button at the top and just pop your question in then. We've had one, I think, for Maria around your literacy, numeracy, cognition provision class. Is it run in each year group? And could you maybe just talk a little bit about how that operates?
It's primarily for key stage, well, it is for key stage 3 pupils. The idea is that we are trying to close the gap before to help them then when so that they can access more of key stage 4. So it's quite an intense setup, very multisensory, very much pupil led, but very carefully monitored to ensure that progress is being made. It's very few children, it's a high ratio staff, and it's very, you know, for example, some of the children can't work better with their shoes off. So it's kind of, again, similar in a way to what Rachel was saying about the environment and making sure that that environment's right. Lots of play therapies, some of the children been through significant trauma. So it's just very multi-sensory approach.
Brilliant. Thank you, Maria. I had the question, I guess maybe for Lyn and Maria in particular, but maybe if Rachel wants to come in as well, about that role of the ALN co, and you both teased out a little bit about that in terms of what we were finding and the way it was working in Whitmore. I just thought if you had to put your finger on what makes that role really be successful in an environment, a school or a setting, what do you think some of those key factors would be?
I think it's you know, one of the great things really about the kind of new ALN Act is that kind of acknowledgement of the role of the ALNCO, and you know, in high schools, especially having the Elenco as part of your senior leadership team is crucially important. Because, as I said in my presentation, there's not one decision which is made in our school, well, relevant decision, obviously, but where we're not thinking about that. And, you know, when Maria talked about the class rationales, the Elenco then is involved in the monitoring of that and the ensuring that that practice is actually happening on the ground. So for me, as somebody who's worked in inclusion for my whole career, this was a brilliant thing to have the Elenco kind of elevated into that role.
Right.
Absolutely.
Notice that time, Lyn.
Yeah, and I would agree with you fully there, Maria. I think in the most effective schools that we visited, the Elenco was part of the senior leadership team, or even when they weren't, they certainly were part of those quality assurance and improvement planning processes. But I had a question as well. Staffing for ALN is so important, isn't it? Not just on that strategic level, but you've both mentioned in your presentations, you've talked about support staff and skilled support staff. And I just wanted to ask you, how do you ensure that that happens? And how do you possibly quality assure that work as well? Maybe more of a challenge in a high school, possibly.
I think for us, we're really passionate about professional learning, as Maria said, and our teaching assistants and learning support staff are at the centre of our thoughts when we're thinking about an inset day. So it's not that they are doing anything alongside, they have their full programme ready for them to focus on. And in that respect, many of them have become upskilled. They are hugely knowledgeable and they train each other. So if somebody goes on a training course, our expectation would be that they train everybody else, and that absolutely happens. But not only that, we have a really robust professional development process for them as well. So they set, obviously through that process, they set targets for themselves. They're observed in class, and then we review those. And so we feel like we're upskilling people, we're giving them the confidence, they're gaining the knowledge. And you know, I feel proud that any of those people, if they left us at any time, they would say, while I was at Whitmore High School, I was trained so well. That's really important because that's what the children then are receiving.
And I'd say on the flip side of that, from a teaching staff perspective, it's really important that they understand how important the role of support staff are within the classroom. And so when I'm observing the teaching staff, I see it from a slightly different perspective, like how are they utilising that support staff? Are they utilising them effectively? And if not, that's something for the teacher to be working on as well, alongside the support staff.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maria. Rachel, did you want to come in there with any responses? Because you said you've got 60 members of staff at Homestead, if I'm right.
Yes, we do. I think I did touch on it and explain that our development really has been bespoke because it has been such a change of mindset, change of thinking for staff, existing staff that we inherited, and then obviously new staff that have joined us. So I think it's just been super important for me as the ALNco, but obviously as the owner, to have an overview and then to be able to work with room managers to support all of the staff, identify any specific needs that then feeds into the training. So I think just being involved and making sure that, as I spoke about with the planning process, that's a consistent element of what you do is just super important to identify children's needs, but obviously staff needs as well.
Absolutely.
And those.
Yeah,
We've had a question. We've had a question particularly for you, Rachel, which is it says great presentation, which is absolutely right. I agree. But it says, how involved are you in supporting that transition into school from the nursery? I guess particularly with a focus on ALN, although, you know, as you said, thinking about all the children's needs.
So we have lots of feeder schools, obviously as a children's nursery, and we have up to 12 schools that the children might go to, and we really do work hard in the summer term developing relationships. Obviously we have existing relationships with local schools, but developing relationships with teachers, but schools in general, to support transition. So teaching staff come into our nursery to spend time with the children. They're obviously invited. We have open days, but we have sort of enjoyable times such as picnics where the staff can play alongside the children and see them in their environment. When we have had, we've had 2 different children, 3 actually, that have gone to early years then in a school setting. We've worked with them consistently from probably right the way through their early education to develop that relationship. So staff will spend time with the school in their setting, but then the school will send teaching staff into our setting to spend time with the children in the space, because I think that's super important, and that's worked really, really well.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you all of you so much for your contributions. They've been invaluable and really, really interesting. And I really hope you've all enjoyed this first Estyn Live webinar of 2025. If you do have any questions that come to you afterwards based on the really interesting things that we've heard today, you can email communications@estyn.gov.wales and we'll get back to you. A special thank you to Lyn, Maria and Rachel for your really great inputs and for taking the time to share that experience and expertise with us today. But thank you all for joining us on the call. And if you have any feedback, please don't hesitate to contact us on communications@estyn.gov.wales. So thank you all. That's going to round up the webinar for today, and I hope you all have a lovely evening. Diolch pawb. Hwyl fawr.